It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
Welcome back to Unscripted. I'm Paige.
And I'm Natalie.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about someone who posthumously has remained larger than life figure at the time of their very early and untimely death. Sadly, this beautiful, troubled person is part of the 27 Club, which if you're not super familiar with 27 Club, it is a thing of many very popular and successful actors and musicians who may or may not have been troubled souls, many of them though were, that passed at the ripe young age of 27. And it really just is uncanny. The list
It's long.
of people. We're talking Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and none other than who we're talking about today, and so many others, Amy Winehouse.
I think you really hit the nail on the head. She did become a spectacle.
And she didn't like it.
And she didn't like it. But by 23, she had already made one of the most influential, important albums of the 21st century. And then by 4 years later, like you mentioned, at the age of 27, she was gone. And in between, there wasn't any new music. There was just headlines. This once-in-a-generation voice became a tabloid sensation. And not for good stuff. She really did unravel before our eyes. And it was sad to watch this unraveling become a spectacle in the tabloids.
I was trying to remember at the time what I knew of her and her troubles and maybe what she was going through or what was going on with her. I leave that as a list because it was really that intense. There was so many things going on. I think a lot of people sort of maybe during this larger, very public unraveling get upset. We have shows that she's barely able to do her job that they paid to see her do. And just like a lot of drug use, alcohol use, alcohol is drug, but being more specific. And I think people sort of started to see it a bit. I do not mean this in a horrific way. I mean it in a more of a literal way. They sort of started to see it as like a joke of sorts that like, oh yeah, that's Amy Winehouse. She's a mess, which is sad to me because by the time of her passing, she really did have a team of people who were doing everything for her. And I think without that, it would have been a lot even worse, but also can we please get her help? And some of them did try. And there were moments of getting her help and trying to do what was right by her. But at the end of the day as well, she was an adult and could sign herself out of anywhere she was and those types of things. But those that started with her, right? There's two people that she's very close with that she kind of started her career with. I think they really tried when they could. I mean, one time, one of them even has them in his vehicle. They drive her out to a rural area and just say, you know, we got to get you help. And she started getting frustrated and upset. She sort of took it as a joke at first, but then increasingly got upset and then finally agreed to go to rehab. But it's like, of course, she got out. She got back with a person who she was in a very tumultuous relationship with. These are the things we were seeing in the tabloids, right? Is all of these things and pictures from a crazy night with Amy Winehouse and Blake. So
there really was that narrative shift, right? It moved away from what is she going to create next? What songs is she going to come out with? To is she going to survive this week?
And I think the jazz community really holds Frank, which is her first album, very near and dear. I mean, you have people like Tony Bennett hearing her and wanting to work with her immediately, saying it's one of the best voices that he's ever heard. And from Tony Bennett, that is a huge compliment, number one. But to Amy and her father, one of the biggest compliments. Probably she would very likely regard that as one of the biggest moments of her life. And incidentally, Tony Bennett actually introduced one of the first Grammys that Amy ever won. And she was not in full attendance, but she was watching. And you could just see she's standing on this like stage with a group of people around her. I do not know where she was or who everybody was, but I know her dad was in the crowd. And she's kind of getting a little shaky, like Tony Bennett's up there. I forget who he was standing with, and he's getting ready to introduce the best new album for Back to Black, because you got to think Frank was not going to be in a Grammy category. Too new, too niche, too early fans for Amy. Okay, but by the time she starts growing, Back to Black, she's getting Grammy nods, if you will, and it was up for best album and won. And Tony Bennett got to deliver that on the television straight to her, but she's kind of shaky waiting for him to say it. She looks at her dad and she goes, "Dad, Tony Bennett," like basically saying like, "Are you
we made it
kidding me?
Yeah.
This is a moment for me." And she really lived her life, I think, wanting to prove a lot of herself to her dad. I don't think he ever meant to make her feel less than, but in her early life, her parents' relationship wasn't the best. And he did, unfortunately, as he admits on his own, he had a long affair with somebody from work early on in Amy's life. I think she was about 18 months when they met. And then by about 10 years old, when Amy was 10, that's when her father left the family. So that was probably an affair that was going on for a very long time. And he left. And I think she maybe for her whole life always wanted to feel like she was good enough for her dad to stay, which is so sad because that is not anybody's job, no matter their age, to make themselves feel like they have to be good enough for a father to stay. And he did stay in her life, by the way, though. I mean, I don't know if in the same way or as well or what the dynamic was there, but he was in her life, but right. I mean, not in the home and not in the way that she had been used to before 10.
Right. I think she really felt that sustained betrayal, that prolonged betrayal that he had when he participated in that years-long affair with the woman he worked with.
That is so profound. And that is so likely what she felt.
Because like you said, they were still in each other's lives. We both watched that documentary, Amy, by A24 on Netflix. And
from 2015. So this is not even 4 years after she passes when they're filming everything, I'm sure, because she passed in 2011 and this came out in 2015. So just around 4 years later.
But they used a lot of footage. It seems like personal footage from her friends, from the people she worked with. And also there's a lot of recordings. And in the documentary, she talks about how her father wasn't there a lot. And then when he was there physically, he wasn't like mentally there. And so she felt some sort of sense of abandonment from him. I think we can really look at her parents' divorce as like the catalyst for a lot of her self-destructive behaviors that she eventually really leans into as an adult.
And she says that. She says it to, I think it's an interview with Blake, her ex-husband and big love of her life, chaotic as it may have been. She mentions that not just the divorce, but more specifically, that sustained betrayal that you so perfectly coined that she felt growing up when that happened. That is the catalyst for why she started this heavy use of alcohol and marijuana that then, unfortunately, towards her passing, led to heavier drug use.
And she was 9 years old when all of that really started happening, which she goes into detail a little bit about it in the documentary. She says she was 9 years old when she started drinking, when she got her first tattoo, and she started skipping school. And her mom would come home and she'd find Amy at home with her boyfriend.
Yep.
at 9.
She had no rules.
No.
And she knew she had no rules. So she just kind of didn't care. I think she even told her mom one time, like, you need to be harder on me, Mom. Like, she knew she was just
she said she was soft.
running. Yeah, you're too soft on me. And well, I think that came from a loving place. I think she was. I think she was begging for structure. And I think that her parents went, and this is without parent shame because there is no perfect parent, but I think the parents went the route of, let's not upset. Amy isn't talking about it. We're not talking about it. We're all moving on from this, divorce and affair. And her dad even says, I figured, Amy seemed to have gotten over it. It's like, clearly she didn't, because at 9 years old, she was drinking. Maybe you just didn't know, Mitch, honestly. However, hindsight's always 20/20, so
I think part of that too is her mom's uncertainty of what to do with such a stubborn, hard-headed child, because we do see clips of her as a young girl, and it's clear that she likes to get her way, and if she doesn't, then she's going to have a tantrum. And I think as Janice, her mom, when she was in that position, she didn't know what to do. And so she just was what Amy called soft. She was soft, let Amy do what she needed to do because she didn't know what to do.
Yeah, they just kind of went the complete opposite. Like, maybe they feel like they tried, but I'm going to say it appears on the outside, or at least what Amy has expressed, and just kind of knowing what kind of happened, that there wasn't a lot of trying. Again, I figured Amy had kind of gotten over it, and that was that. And then the mom just letting Amy do as she pleased, so as maybe not to upset and give her a life that she wanted and was comfortable, but she probably wanted the attention of like, hey, Amy, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. The guidance and the boundaries and the structure being the most important part. I mean, kids always want to do what they want to do, but at the end of the day, structure is what can guide them towards understanding and where limits are, whether they want to test them or not. I'm not talking about discipline. I'm not talking about grounding versus not grounding. I'm talking literally about not just seeing where the wind blows with a little girl's life at 9, 10 years old. That's horrible. I do want to backtrack and say that, to me, Amy being born September 14th, 83, I don't always get too deep into astrology, but this is so interesting to me coming from a Virgo, because they are normally so naturally structured from themselves, even if they don't get structure in their life. And again, astrology is not everything, but this is so interesting. And it does make me think that, like, okay, like this was somebody born under energy that typically prefers extreme structure that didn't get to live within that. And it kind of makes me go, to see all of this unraveling happen, not living in a situation like that. I find that like really interesting without having to get too deep into astrology, but it's like, this is a Virgo just flapping it, doggy paddling through life. Like, no wonder, that's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you put it perfectly.
Okay. Yay. Because I didn't want to like harp on it, but I wanted to like give it a pinpoint, but I don't want it to be this like profound thing of like, it's definitely because she was Virgo. It's just like, it made me think like, wow, here's a Virgo not living with structure. That's all. Okay. Yay. All right.
She did have one thing that brought her structure in her young adult life, and that was the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. She was a vocalist, and she found some sense of fulfillment there. She definitely was drawn to jazz. And what I didn't know is that a number of her maternal uncles also were jazz musicians. And so it was like in her blood, but also like in her home. It was the music that her family listened to. And so she really felt at home and felt fulfilled by her time in the jazz orchestra.
And her grandmother on her dad's side was a singer as well. She dated a jazz saxophonist, Ronnie Scott. I'm not super well versed on jazz. It kind of scares me because there are some like jazz purists out there. So I'm really not prepared for conversation about the beloved jazz. But she's got this music in her blood, basically. And you can feel that throughout her career, just The way it flowed out of her, there's no mistaking that this was in her blood.
I feel like she was also a jazz purist. I believe she cites like Monk as a source of inspiration for her, among others. And it was around.
She was called a jazz snob. She was called that. I don't think she called herself that, but somebody did call her that. It's important to these people who love jazz. It's just like, it's their life and it is so important to them. And I get that.
And you could see that importance music was playing in her life as she started to put together songs of her own. She made a demo tape, and her best friend at the time eventually got it to a scout at a talent agency. And then she was eventually signed to Simon Fuller's 19 Management in 2002. And
she was paid £250 a week against future earnings. So that's kind of how much they believed in her. But also, this is a little predatory in a certain way. I don't know how normal or abnormal that is for music management, but that's pretty intense. Weekly.
Mm-hmm. So what, £1,000 a month? And then it would be taken from her future earnings.
Yep. I don't know that ever became an issue, though, because she definitely got gigs. She was a working artist. She, I think, became a regular jazz singer at what was the Copton Club. I'm not super familiar with that venue at all, big, small, but obviously it would have been pivotal in her career and helped continue to launch her.
And she was eventually signed to Island Records, and that's where she eventually recorded her first album, her debut album, Frank. It was released when she was 20, and it eventually hit number 3 on UK charts, which is huge. This debut album comes out and starts smashing records.
Isn't that crazy that that's not enough to get you in like the Grammy lineup? It took her to her second album, although her second album arguably is what helped her cross the Atlantic, if you will, into the US market a little bit more. But trust me, there were still people in the US that knew her. Because again, the jazz community was really rallied behind her as one of the best vocalists like of her time, if not like ever.
And that's not to say that this album, Frank, didn't afford her. It earned her awards and it gave her some financial freedom. She was able to buy her first flat with the money, and she had a lot more money coming in. But as we would later learn, success didn't fix anything. Money didn't fix anything. It actually funded some of her habits. One thing I did recently learn, though, was that she had a secret track on Frank, the first debut album, and it was called Mr. Magic. It's a hidden track, and it's all about flirting with substance abuse or substances. And so we kind of see this substance use lurking in the background, in the shadows, and it's starting to come out a little more as she makes more money and gets to be a little bit more in the spotlight, which before we started recording, we talked about how she sort of resisted that part of being a singer. She didn't want the celebrity of it all.
The more and more popular and well-known she became, it was very apparent how uncomfortable it made her. She did not identify with it. She was almost like not linking the two, where it was like my work and fame are going together. It's me. They know me. They know who I am. I mean, even having a podcast, like we don't like get recognized or anything, but when somebody does listen that I encounter, or maybe it's a friend of a friend and they go, "Oh my gosh, I've been listening to your podcast. Like, it's so cool to meet you." And it's just like, oh my gosh, like it does kind of take me aback. And
it's a little embarrassing.
It's a little embarrassing. That's the word. It's not uncomfortable because it's very, very sweet and kind. And we are in a safe setting. But I could imagine if it's not even like a friend of a friend and it's somebody who just kind of like recognizes you like on the street, that could start to become a little overwhelming, albeit while you appreciate the support, right? And I think we hear a lot about this from celebrities where it's like you have to, if you're going to ask for a picture or things like that, you have to kind of just try to read the room just a little bit in terms of like they're eating with their family and stuff. Don't make them stop eating and take a picture. But like also like you are the reason that they're famous and they have a lot of money. So like they need to be nice to you. Like there's a balance.
And I think I like want to clarify when I say embarrassing, and not to speak for Amy Winehouse, because obviously I don't know her, but when I said embarrassing, I meant it feels a little bit vulnerable. They've
exactly
heard
right.
you say things that maybe, not that you wouldn't say out in public because this is going out to the public, but they've heard you say things that you recorded sitting in your office at home. You know what I mean? So it feels a little bit more insular and private, even though it is a public conversation. And I know for Amy, a lot of her songs initially started up as poems. And they were poems inspired by her life and the deep cuts of her life, like the betrayals that she felt in relationships, whether romantic or with her father, what she was going through with her substance use abuse. And so I could see why that would feel overwhelming, obviously from a much smaller scale for us, but she was starting to be recognized and people were meeting her and knowing so much about her.
This is an era where parasocial relationships were not necessarily even as well understood because you really only had MySpace, which wasn't really made to breed parasocial relationships. It was to connect with people you already knew. And Facebook, you still had to have an email address by the time Back to Black came out. So it's not really something, right, that she probably even had a lot of experience with. She didn't have some Instagram that people were following. She probably didn't even have like a public MySpace for everybody. Do you know what I mean? So like building these parasocial relationships with fans, there wasn't any clue to what was going on from the safety of our own home. It was just, I'm out and about. Oh, and this just happened. Instead of being able to take that clue and to take those, put things in place that help you feel safe and ready to take on whatever this may be, because you have no idea by, for example, looking at your follower account and your engagement, how well received and how quickly you are becoming known parasocially.
Well, and I think an important element to this conversation that I don't want to skip over is the fact that the paparazzi culture at this time was so different than what it is now. This is when people were really not afforded any privacy. They were hounded by paparazzi. They were stalked by paparazzi. And she really got the worst of it.
British tabloids, so are American tabloids, but British tabloids are brutal. They're still pretty brutal. They are not known to be the most respectful. They will dive in, lies or not. They will dive in. They will post that awful picture of you. They don't care.
Well, and as we've mentioned at the top, this is a woman unraveling throughout her very short career. She might have been on top, but she was at the bottom of a bottle for most of it. And the paparazzi was there to capture it all.
Exactly. Without helping her.
She became a spectacle.
That's exactly what happened. And it is so sad because, again, this is one of the greatest voices of a generation, especially within jazz, which Frank is a lot more purely jazz than Back to Black is. Although Amy wants us all to know this is still not pop. Okay. It's not pop. And if a girl wants us to know that, then we're going to know it.
I think she even left her management because her management had been linked to like Spice Girls and S Club 7. And she said, I want no part of that. Let me get somebody a little bit more in line with what I'm going for.
She wants no part of that. And I don't think she seems it poorly on its own, but it just wasn't part of who she was. You know what this really kind of reminded me of? Or kind of the culture behind the music for Amy? Because of the clubs she used to be seen at, they were very like pure music clubs where it was like the starving artist type, lesser known. And it reminds me of the early 2000s punk scene. Punk had been around since the late 70s, but by the early 2000s, we have Warped Tour, we have a lot of different music festivals that kind of celebrate punk and pop punk, things like that. And as bands became lesser known to widely known, it became like a negative thing. Like, oh, they're a sellout. Like, oh, they're underground. I only listen to underground bands. It kind of reminded me of that culture of like, no, I know the pure, real music from this jazz club. Like, I know the real music. And this guy, he lives on the street just to be able to come here and perform, like, you know, that kind of thing. So it's like these underground acts were who was cool to her and who she wanted to associate and hang around at with these clubs and everything that she would go to.
That makes so much sense. And it's probably like not the only parallel that she has with like history, because I did mention that she eventually bought her first flat, and she bought her first flat in Camden, which was known for having a very big punk history pub culture. And she started becoming a regular at one of the bars over there called the Holly Arms. Her drink of choice was called the Rickstasy, which sounds very alcoholic.
Sounds scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where she would meet the love of her life, Blake Fielder Civil. And not only would he change her life romantically, but he would help alter the course of her life forever.
Quite literally, because he is unfortunately the one who ended up introducing her to crack cocaine and heroin.
Yeah. So he did introduce her to heroin, which we know she had dabbled in drugs before, but she hadn't gone past weed and alcohol use. And so with the introduction of Blake into her life, she started experimenting with harder drugs. And he really became what her life was about. He was her muse. They were codependent together. They were chaotic, this like chaotic love, on again, off again relationship. And I distinctly remember this was around the time she started getting a lot of tattoos, because prior to this meeting of Blake and the release of Frank, she was very minimally tattooed. She might have had a couple, because I did mention she got a tattoo when she was like 9, but she didn't have them on her upper arms or forearms or anywhere like that. And this is around the time where she eventually had her arms completely covered in tattoos. She started sporting the really thick winged eyeliner. She started teasing her hair into this large beehive. She really started to become or evolve into what we would associate with Amy Winehouse. Those ballerina flats too. Do you remember those? She would wear them all the time.
They were dirty always,
but they were so
like,
cute though. Like I wanted some
so
after
cute.
I saw her wearing them.
She looked super cute in them. I love like the sort of 60s vibe she took. I really, really do. That beehive she sort of unraveled did get a little bit messy, but then bless it all, they were like, look, girl, here's what we're going to do. The more she started making money, because you know my hair theory.
Wait.
Once you change your hair, you're about to pop off. You like an artist that's kind of underground? If they change their hair in a major way, like they start wearing a big old bouffant beehive, it's on. It's going. And that's kind of what happened to her until they finally tamed that back. I think like Lady Gaga, they finally tamed that back just a little bit, and they started putting her in this big, beautiful, shiny ponytail. Her hair looked so much healthier. And you could see at events, she started wearing that ponytail a lot more. And she was not doing it herself, obviously.
The hair theory, it pops in almost for every celebrity. We see that a lot. I did want to mention the tattoos for just a second.
Yeah, let's go back to those, because there's some interesting ones.
Well, because like what I remember when I saw her in the tabloids around this time was her having this tattoo of Blake's name on her chest. Do you remember that? So that just shows like what an impact and what importance he played in her life. He was literally tattooed. It was on her chest, like over her heart. And then he had her name tattooed behind his ear or somewhere. So like they both were sporting each other's names.
If you put that man's name on your chest and he puts your name behind his ear, girl, run.
The tattoo placement didn't stop her. The infidelity on his part didn't stop her.
Nothing
did.
The
prison stints didn't stop her. They couldn't stay away from each other.
No. And that part was mutual. Just no matter what was going on, like they were magnets.
They were.
Toxic magnets.
And they were with other people when they met, and it didn't stop them. So, tattoo placement of behind the ear or not, she was going to be with Blake, whether her family liked it or not, whether it was good for her or not. This was who she wanted to be with.
There was a breakup. There were many, but there was one particular breakup. And they talk about this in the documentary, and they show it in the biopic, which I highly suggest watch. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about the casting of the biopic and the singing voice in the biopic, but I think it does a really beautiful job of telling her life story. So definitely give that a watch. Anyways, there is a breakup shown in both of those that they talk about where she and Blake being apart, she couldn't handle it. She couldn't even barely function. She was just so out of it. She was drinking. The place was a mess. I mean, they had to go in and get her and be like, are you okay? Like they had to physically, I think, like remove her from the place to like get her to start healing from it. And I wish I could remember more off the top of my head of exactly what happened after that. But it was a very significant moment for her and her loved ones in terms of like this up and down situation with her and Blake and how she would be when they weren't together. And they did end up getting married for a couple of years.
Right. They got married in 2009, I believe, or 2007 to 2009. And they eventually were divorced, but they were still going back to each other after the divorce. They were still very much a part of each other's stories at that time. And I think it's really important that you did bring up that spiral that happened when this big breakup happened, because it sort of was the source material for Back to Black, which became her biggest album, her sophomore album, which peaked with the song Rehab. We would later learn
that song was everywhere. You couldn't shop in any single store in the US without that song playing.
Well, and it was very autobiographical, right? The line says, they tried to make me go to rehab, but I said, no, no, no. And she acknowledges that actually happened. They tried to get her to rehab. They tried to get her out of this self-destructive spiral, and she wouldn't let them go. And that like defiance almost feels like it became a prophecy, right? Like they tried to get me to go to rehab. I said, no, no, no. Well, she didn't go to rehab and she's gone.
Yeah. I mean, she tried to go to rehab a couple times, but was always signing out or was using almost immediately after. It was no good. Unless there was one moment where she was really healed and was in St. Lucia, which she loved. St. Lucia. I forget what she called it, but she called it like, it was basically her special place, but she called it like her island. Did she call it her island in the sun or something? Like it was really a special place for her. And there was a moment after rehab, I think, where she went there, or she was at least there, and she was kind of doing okay, surrounded by a lot of people who loved her. But then it's like, here's Mitch, her father, who arrived at St. Lucia with a camera crew, and she just wanted a break of all that. She didn't like that. And then there was people who saw her and wanted a picture, and she was very kind to them. But her dad was like, well, why'd you do that to them? And And I was thinking, wait, what does Mitch mean? Did you see that in the documentary, that part? Because it was a blip of the St. Lucia part. But I was like, Mitch, she clearly just wanted to be with her family. She gave them the picture. I don't think she was rude at all, but I could have missed something.
My opinion of her father is that, and he says this in an interview I watched, I don't know if it was in the documentary, it was somewhere else. But when he was asked around this time about her alcohol use and her drug use, and they flat out ask him if he's in denial. And he says, well, maybe I'm in denial. I probably am. Those aren't his exact words, but that's the sentiment he gives. And I think he wasn't able to see how much she was struggling at the time. I don't know if he didn't want to or he just couldn't. But for whatever reason,
he said
he
she
didn't see
need
it.
Rehab. Yeah, he didn't see it. He said she didn't need a rehab. Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off, but I get so heated when I think about it, because it's like, yes, she did, bitch. And you are not a doctor
Did you say
of
bitch or
any
Mitch?
sort. Mitch.
Oh, sorry.
So just to repeat, Mitchell, her father, who I will call Mitchell, not Mitch, he said, again, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I get so heated because he does say one point earlier on, no, she doesn't need rehab. But it's like even Amy knew she had a problem because she was in the car with her early manager who she wanted to leave Simon Fuller to manage only
Nick
her.
Goldwyn.
Yep. And she was like, okay, yeah, you know what? I do have a problem. So like even she knew. And it's like, why would Mitchell ever be the gold standard on knowing whether or not she needed rehab? She's been drinking since she was 9, Mitchell. Come on now.
I mean, all he had to do was listen to her album and he would have
Truth.
known what the greater public knew, is that she was struggling. And I feel like her work really immortalized that struggle, that addiction that she was experiencing. You mentioned earlier that Back to Black, that album, was nominated at the Grammys that year in 2008. She was actually
I think she won like 5.
She won 5. And I have some stats on that, because I was very excited about this. So she won 5, but the reason she couldn't go was because she was in rehab and her American visa was denied for use and abuse of narcotics. And that prevented her from coming to the US for the Grammys. So she did watch it televised live and she did perform.
Yes, she had a stage. She had people surrounding her. Again, her father in the crowd. She seemed to be just as pleased as anything when she won Best New Album for Back to Black.
She won Song of the Year for Rehab, Record of the Year, Best Female Pop Vocal Performance, and Best Pop Vocal Album. And she beat out Taylor Swift, Paramore, Feist.
She beat out Justin Timberlake too, at least for the Best Album one that Tony Bennett announced for. I thought that was funny because she had this reaction of, is his album really called What Comes Around Goes Around? Really? So it was almost just like disdain. I was like, I wonder what kind of tea she knew about Justin Timberlake at the time.
I would be curious to know.
Maybe none, maybe a lot. Who knows?
I don't know that she was really involved in like the pop culture world, though.
It was still mostly the British pop culture world. She was very involved with like Russell Brand. He's got his major problems. So I'm not going to let him look like an angel at all. But he did, I believe, try to help her at some point too. Like so many people around her wanted her to succeed and knew she needed help though.
And one last thing about Grammy night before we move on. She tied with Beyonce's then record of winning the most Grammys by a woman in a single night. Eventually that record was broken again by Beyonce and then Adele, but 5 Grammys in one night. Like we were saying, she wasn't even involved in really the Hollywood life. She was in the UK at this time. So it just shows how people felt about the album, how they reacted to it, their response. She really was starting to become a global star.
It shows what the trajectory was.
Or supposed to be. Because
supposed to be, yeah.
After this album, people were expecting another one to come off hot off the press. And instead of that, it was silence for years.
She was writing, but nothing really came of that in terms of anything that was released that I know of.
I think you're right. I think she had mentioned that a couple weeks prior to her death that she was working on something and she hoped for it to be released January of the following year. But we know that never happened. And when I said silence, I really meant on the career front because, no album came out. But we did hear a lot about her, especially if you were around our age. And we saw the tabloids. We saw court dates. We saw paparazzi ambushes. We saw canceled performances. We saw drunk performances. She was very much talked about at this time, but it wasn't for the quality of her work. I actually read that she punched a fan at one point, and that was what one of the court dates was for. And so you can see like this spiral started picking up speed. It wasn't just drug use, self-sabotage in a sense of like her own health, but like her work as a whole was starting to be tainted by what was happening in her personal life.
Blake says in the documentary that they were so like because they both self-sabotaged and they really understood that part of each other. And they both really fed that part of each other. She did this. It's no more evident than when she's supposed to be doing this big tour for her album, Back to Black, which had won, again, at least 5 Grammys. And she does not want to do this tour. As it came closer and closer and closer, she didn't want to do it. But it's like, what do all of those around her want and need her to do in terms of keeping everybody making money and keeping this career a thing, which is so sad to me because it was probably not ever going to be the right thing for her to go on tour. Well, they wanted her to go on tour. So she was, well, a little bit reluctantly, because as it came near, again, she didn't want to go. She tried to self-sabotage it by getting super drunk, was passed out. They went to go get her, and she arrived in another country in pajamas. I want to say barefoot. And then once she kind of comes to, she's like, okay, well, I'm here, and she's got to perform. Well, she goes out on stage just beyond capacity mentally to be able to actually put on a show. She's clearly intoxicated. People are very upset that are in attendance, and there's no show, and the tour is canceled. To me, it's pretty evident that she really wanted that tour canceled and was going to self-sabotage to the point where it could get canceled. I think that's the only way she knew how to get that done, and she was willing to do that. Her response when they were getting on the plane leaving after the tour is canceled was, at least I get to, and I think she was referencing a wedding that she was now going to be able to attend. And that just shows you like what mattered more to her. And that also makes me kind of sad that she's being pushed into all these things that weren't very safe for her and away from the things that may have been the best thing for her to be rallied around, which is like a lot of loved ones, besides those that are in denial that their daughter has an addiction problem. But again, the loved ones that care for you, that clearly mean enough to you where you're so excited that your tour is canceled because you now get to go to their wedding. That was she was getting on the plane when she said that.
Isn't it sad that her self-destruction really became a spectacle rather than something that triggered help?
Yeah. I mean, she might be with us if it did. We see this with celebrities a lot, though. They become the brand, they become the product. And those around them, no matter how much they love them, rely on this product. So they push them and they push them and they push them and they, obviously, again, hindsight being 2020, I don't think most of these people would want to do that to her detriment of death. But I also think that they had seen this cycle 100 times before. So what was it to them in terms of this time she was going to end up dying? But, the addiction continues and continues. And she and her now ex-husband are broken up. And it takes us to July 23rd of 2011.
Something to take note about this date is there are quite a few reports that have come out since her passing that have said that they felt she had been sober for a couple of days prior to her death. And they felt like she was finally getting her footing. Have you seen that?
I hadn't heard that specifically in regard to Amy, but it isn't shocking to me. I have heard it stated that it can be really dangerous after being sober for an addict to then go on a bender, probably for a lot of different reasons. And that probably varies with all the different types of drugs out there too, as to why it can be dangerous. But yes, that does not shock me. And I think she had been around other people before. So I know she would go through these kind of sober stints, but they never really lasted. So just cyclically, that makes sense. And just kind of like historically outside of her own life, that would make complete sense.
About 24 hours before her death, Amy had actually seen a doctor. And this was just for a routine checkup. The doctor was happy with her condition. But before he left, she had told him that she was having trouble with sobriety. She said that she didn't want to die. And these are her last recorded words, at least according to her bodyguard. If I could, I would give it back just to walk down the street with no hassle.
Less than 24 hours, like Natalie said, she was found dead. After her death was announced, obviously media and camera crews were everywhere. Forensic investigators also sort of entered the chat there, but it was later recorded that she did die as a result of alcohol use.
I had seen somewhere that she was 5 times the driving limit in the UK. And that gives you a really clear sense of how much alcohol was in her system. It was just too much for her body to handle. She hadn't had alcohol in a few days and went back to it. She drank too much. She also has been reported, I believe her brother has stated publicly that she suffered from bulimia. And people believe that that could have also exacerbated, the alcohol in her system. It just is awful and tragic all around.
It's tragic. You mentioned the bulimia, which we had not touched on. This started at a really young age for her. It seems like it was also something she had been seeking attention through. I think she was she might have been around 14. Please don't quote me. And she told her mom about it. She goes, Mom, I have the best diet. I just eat what I want. And then I purge it. And they just let it go. She thought she would grow out of it. But the mom does correct herself, which I think was a really important part of the interview. And she goes, now I know it's not something you grow out of or anything like that. I think she was trying not to give attention to something she felt was negative.
She figured if she ignored it or didn't give too much scrutiny of it, it would just kind of go away. And it just never did.
And it seems like with Amy that wasn't the best route in terms of helping her. It was the best route of escalating something. And that bulimia was absolutely part of her life. It was pretty brutal. There's like a moment of her in a studio. She ordered a huge amount of food, ate it, and purged it. And the bathroom was in quite disarray. And it's even noted by one of the people in attendance at the studio, like the towels had like mascara and stuff all over them and stuff because, her eyes are watering from purging. And so it really was just like everything that she needed help with. Everybody kind of just like almost let her figure it out on her own, and it never got figured out. Again, I don't mean that that's not to say that people wanted to help her or did try at different moments, but it was like this, it just never clicked. There wasn't this like unified, to me, doesn't seem like there was a unified ground that she could stand on. It was this time when she was in rehab, we did it this way. And this time, instead of this, like, there wasn't this unified front saying, okay, Amy, this is what we as people who love you are requesting so that you get yourself taken care of, or we are afraid that you won't be here anymore. And that never happened. And I think deep down, I kind of think she wanted that. I really, really do.
I mean, it's hard to say.
But without knowing she wanted it,
Mm-hmm. It's hard to say. She struggled so much in her life and she didn't really know peace until she was gone. The memorial service took place 3 days after her death, and Blake was not allowed to attend. He had been barred from the event by her family, but he was also in prison at the time, so he physically couldn't attend anyway. Even though they were divorced at the time, we did mention that they constantly found their way back to each other. And so he was clearly very distraught by the death and passing of Amy. And he was afforded a chance to grieve her with his own ceremony type of deal in the prison.
In Amy's honor, the Amy Winehouse Foundation stands. It was started on her 28th birthday, September 14th, 2011, just a few mere months after her passing, not even 2 months after her passing. Her brother Alex is or was an employee, actually, and this foundation aims to help vulnerable or disadvantaged young people, and it works with other charitable organizations to provide that frontline support. It also works to prevent the effects of drug and alcohol misuse on young people and aims to support, inform, and inspire vulnerable and disadvantaged young people so that they can reach their full potential. And I just love the way that that is written, because I was literally reading that because I couldn't have said it better. Reaching full potential is such an important thing in Amy's honor, because while I think she reached a potential of what a wonderful artist she was, of course, but I mean, she was only 27 and could have had such a even bigger, more fulfilled career. It kind of feels like it was just the beginning for her, even though she was already on her sophomore album. It just still felt like such a beginning for her. And I don't know if that full potential and what could have been there, I think, was missed. And I get kind of sad when I think about it. I'm like, well, I wanted that third album. I mean, selfishly. So I really appreciate the way that that is phrased, that that's their aim for these young people and what is driving them. They want to help them reach their full potentials the way that Amy was starting to and could have.
Be sure to tune in on Thursday for our true crime case coverage of a case that needs your attention, next Monday for another unscripted, and Tuesday for our docu-files. We can't wait for you to join us. We're also available on social media at the Murder Diaries Pod. Until next time.
Bye.